Well, this this last week, as I was praying and asking the Lord what to speak on today, this phrase kept popping into my mind and just wouldn't leave me alone. Come out of Babylon. And so I kind of thought about that for a minute, and just like, I think this actually ties in a little bit with what we were talking about last week too. So let's go through the scriptures and see what we find. And looking through the scriptures, we find that this instruction to come out of Babylon comes 8 times throughout the Old Testament narrative. And then we have one last big crescendo in the New Testament, which is where we're going to spend our time today. And lucky for all of you is that we find this phrase in the New Testament in one of the strangest passages in the Bible. So we're going to work through that today. We find it in Revelation chapters 17 and 18. So we're going to have a little bit of fun today. So this section of Scripture that we're going to look at today, it gives us some insight into the question. Why is it that being a disciple, a follower of Jesus, can be so hard? What is the source of this struggle that we're going through? Both the internal struggle, but also the struggle that we have with the culture, with the world around us. And why is it that we sometimes end up in places where we just don't want to be? Like, why is my life ending up this way? What's going on? And, of course, what does God have to say about all of this? So if you're willing to bear with me here through this very odd scripture passage, I believe that we can shed some, get some light shined on these questions here. Now, before we dive into our scripture passage, first we need to get some context for what we're about to read together. The Revelation of John is a pastoral letter, and it's addressed to 7 different churches in Asia Minor with whom he was involved. But this letter is, even though it's addressed to these 7 specific churches, it is intended for the church universal through all the ages, including us today. It's just as relevant today as it was then. And this letter has a couple of very unique features. In the tradition of the Old Testament prophetic books, Revelation speaks to the church as a prophetic voice from God to his people. And most noticeably, Revelation is an apocalypse, which is a specific genre of ancient writing. Apocalyptic literature makes very frequent use of these bold images and these graphic symbols that were culture current to that day in the first century. It's kind of similar to something that we would encounter today, like a political cartoon. So very bold and odd images and symbols and so forth to drive home a point. And many of the images that we will encounter as we read through this small section in Revelation are going to have we'll have multiple or layered symbolic meanings and so forth. So sometimes you'll find the images switching from this to that, and it's like, what, huh? If you're not paying attention, you can kind of get a little bit dizzy and so forth. But that's the way it works. It's trying to paint a picture in our mind. The kind of the power of the method of communication with apocalyptic is the picture that it's able to form in your mind, more so than it is just a series of propositional statements or so forth. The picture is where the power is. So apocalyptic literature, most importantly, seeks to show us the present in light of unseen realities of the present and the future. Okay? So it seeks to show us what's going on right now in light of things that we don't see that are happening now and things that we don't see that are coming in the future. And apocalyptic lets us know that things are not only as they seem right now. Things are not only in terms of what we can see, smell, touch, taste. There's more going on than what we perceive. Okay? And apocalypse, though the word itself means unveiling, opening up, disclosure, or breaking through. So as we work through the passage, what we're going to be doing, and what happened to John when he had this vision, when Jesus gave him this vision, is we're going to take a look behind the veil of history. We're going to peer through the curtain, and we're going to see what's behind. We're going to see some of the inner workings of history. You know, it's a little bit more complicated than the Wizard of Oz. Don't look behind the curtain. And you see who's pulling the strings. But similar, we're going to see some of the hidden inner workings. Now, depending on where you stand within this prophetic apocalyptic message, there's either great reason for reassuring hope, or there's a very serious and somber reason to repent. All depends on where you stand. So as we jump into the letter of Revelation, chapter 17 and 18, we're entering into a conversation that's already been happening for the first 16 chapters, and actually, frankly, with the whole Old Testament as well. But we're entering into this conversation featuring some contrasting images about life in two different cities, living in Babylon or living in the New Jerusalem. And at the same time, there's a conversation featuring some contrasting images about life as two different women, the harlot of Babylon and the bride of Christ. And these two different symbols, the cities and the women, are talking about more or less the same thing, but in different ways. That's one of those things where it's kind of shifting back and forth with the symbols to give you a picture of what's going on. So let's dig right in. Revelation 17, verse 1. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great whore who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and with the wine of whose fornication the inhabitants of the earth have become drunk." So he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names. And it had 7 heads and 10 horns. That's a reference to the great power and strength and authority that it has. The woman clothed in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filth of her fornication. And on her forehead was written a name, a mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of whores and of the earth's abominations. And I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly amazed. But the angel said to me, "Why are you amazed? I'll tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with the 7 heads and the 10 horns that carries her." Now, don't worry if this next part's a little bit confusing, and we're not going to go through all the symbols, but we'll just read it anyways for the sake of continuity. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to ascend from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. Now here you'll notice was and is about to go. It's a parody of Jesus who was and is to come. So the beast is like a counterfeit to Jesus. And the inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will be amazed when they see the beast, because it was and is to come. This calls for a mind that has wisdom. The 7 heads are the 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. And Rome was founded on 7 mountains here, so it's referring to the current situation where they are in Rome. Also, they are 7 kings, of whom 5 have fallen, 1 is living, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain only for a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but belongs to the 7, and it goes down to destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw were 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour, together with the beast. These are united in yielding their power and authority to the beast. They will make war with the Lamb, which is Jesus, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is the Lord of lords and the King of kings. And those with him are called and chosen and faithful. And he said to me, the waters that you saw where the whore is seated are peoples and multitudes and the nations and languages. And then the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the whore. They will make her desolate and naked. They will devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. Nice friends, eh? For God has put it into their hearts to carry out this purpose by agreeing to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God will be fulfilled. The woman that you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. Chapter 18. After this I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with his splendor. He called out with a mighty voice, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. It has become a dwelling place of demons, a haunt of every foul spirit, a haunt of every foul bird, a haunt of every foul and hateful beast. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxury." Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, so that you do not take part in her sins, and so that you do not share in her plagues. For her sins are heaped high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Render to her as she herself is rendered, and repay her double for her deeds. Mix a double draught for her in the cup she mixed. As she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, so give her a like measure of torment and grief. Since in her heart she says, 'I rule as a queen. I am no widow, and I will never see grief.' Therefore her plagues will come in a single day, pestilence and mourning and famine, and she will be burned with fire. For mighty is the Lord God who judges her. And the kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived in luxury with her will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning. They will stand far off in fear of her torment and say, 'Alas, alas, the great city Babylon, the mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come.' And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her since no one buys their cargo anymore. Cargo of gold, silver, jewels, and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, and scarlet, all kinds of scented wood and articles of ivory and all articles of costly wood, bronze, iron, marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, olive oil, choice flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, slaves, and human bodies and souls. The fruit for which your soul longed has gone from you, and all your luxuries and your splendor are lost to you, never to be found again. The merchants of these wares who gained wealth from her will stand far off in fear of her torment, weeping and mourning aloud. Alas, alas, the great city, clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, with jewels, and with pearls. For in 1 hour all this wealth has been laid waste. And all the shipmasters and seafarers and sailors and all whose trade is on the sea stood off and cried out as they saw the smoke of her burning. What city was like the great city? They threw dust on their heads as they wept and mourned, crying out, "Alas, alas, the great city where all who had ships at sea grew rich by her wealth. For in 1 hour she's been laid waste." Rejoice over her, O heaven, you saints and apostles and prophets, for God has given judgment for you against her. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, "With such violence, Babylon the Great will be thrown down and will be found no more. And the sound of harpists and minstrels and flutists and trumpeters will be heard in you no more. And the artisan of any trade will be found in you no more. And the sound of the millstone will be heard in you no more. It's like a symbol of the leaving of the presence of God. And the light of a lamp will shine in you no more. And the voice of the bridegroom and bride will be heard in you no more. For your merchants were the magnates of the earth, and all the nations were deceived by your sorcery. And in you was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints, and of all who have been slaughtered on the earth. A long passage there, but I think it was good that we went through the whole thing to really get that picture firm in our minds. And I did forewarn you, it's a strange one. There's a lot going on here in our passage. And as you can see, there's many vivid images and symbols and some unique characters that we have going on here. However, our passage is focused mainly on this one character, Babylon the harlot, this cosmic prostitute. And we have a reference to the contrasting bride, but we don't really meet her yet until chapter 19. But we see this picture of Babylon the great harlot. Now, given the nature of this story, particularly that's apocalyptic, we're going to let the images do the talking here. So what is it that we see when we look at Babylon the harlot? What can the images tell us of her character, of her nature? And can we see any parallels with our world today? Well, as we read, there's a few things that we notice that are revealed about her. First thing that we notice is that she's rich. And she worships wealth. We see that she's got expensive clothes and jewelry, and she drinks from a golden cup, which is another symbol of her great wealth and power. She's arrogantly lived this life of extravagant luxury, and she lusts after even more wealth. We see that she's powerful and at the same time unjust. We read that she's simultaneously seated, which means ruling over. She's simultaneously seated over many waters, the beast, and 7 mountains. Now, as we read in the text, it says that the many waters are the peoples, the multitudes, the nations, the languages. So she rules over the people. She's seated on the beast. Now, the beast is this image of political power, of all of our political powers and structures that are at play in our world. And as we read in chapter 12 and 13, the beast is actually controlled by Satan himself, the red dragon. But she is seated on the beast. She's gaining power from him. And then she's seated on 7 mountains, which is a reference to Rome in this day, but also pointing forward to just any empire, any major empire of the world. So she's very powerful, but we see that she uses that power unjustly to feed her appetite for getting more, including being complicit in the sale of human bodies and souls. That's how deep her injustice runs. That's how she uses her power. Next, we see that she's sexually immoral and thus idolatrous. Now, in describing many of her various activities, the word fornication, or in other translations, adultery, the Bible kind of sees the two things very, very similar. When describing many of her various activities, the word fornication is purposely used here for a double meaning. She's willing to do wicked things. She's willing to sell her soul, to sell herself for more wealth, for more power. And yet, at the same time, too, she's also engaging, the implication is that she's also engaging in illicit sexual activity with those who come across her path, as this activity naturally follows idolatry. The Old Testament often refers to the practices of idolatry as fornication or adultery. One, because there's an unfaithfulness towards the partner for whom we've been made, the Lord, but also the practices of idolatry almost always included some sort of sexual defilement, some sort of sexual immorality. So where there's some sort of worshiping of an idol, a wholesale serving some sort of idol, whatever that thing is, could be an object or a person or a deity, whatever, anything that's not God, whenever there's a worship of an idol, sexual immorality is quick to follow, because we end up rendering our sexuality to that which we worship. Next we see she's drunk, and she gets everybody else drunk with her, which is another symptom of her idolatry. For her and her intoxicated friends, they become mad. They're not thinking clearly. They're being deceived by others. We see that they're being deceived by the kings and by the beast. They're self-deceived in terms of how they think, how she thought that she was untouchable and so forth. Blinded to what's going on, and then very callous and uncaring towards others. She's drunk and intoxicated, and we see that she's drunk with her lust and her worship of money, sex, and power. Her idolatry intoxicates her. And she seduces everyone else to come and drink with her and to share in her idolatries so that everyone else can be intoxicated and fall into the same traps. Next, we see that she's thirsty for blood. She has a violent nature to her. And not only is she thirsty for blood, we see that she's already been killing. Much like we saw in last week's message, the kingships of this world advance or preserve themselves by force or by violence. And she is no different. She's getting drunk on the blood of those who are in her way or who don't submit to her way, particularly as we read the followers of Jesus who go a very different way, the followers of Jesus who won't be complicit in her wickedness. Next, we see that the woman is also a city. This is one of those things where we have kind of the image flipping back and forth. We have Babylon the harlot is also Babylon the city. So we have kind of a dual image here. So she represents the city. She represents civilization, the gathering together of human society and everyone in that city. And it's a timeless image here. It was appropriate then, just as it is now. It symbolizes our civilization now. And so she's not a singular person, but rather she's representative of all who are citizens within her city. Her citizens contribute to and exhibit her Babylonness, so to speak, all of her character traits. Babylon is an image with a long history. The word Babylon is derived from the word Babel, as in the Tower of Babel, which we learn about in Genesis chapter 11. At Babel, humanity left the living God, seeking its unity and building a tower that rises to heaven, to the place of God. Let us make a name for ourselves, they say. They seek to build a new society without God. They want to be their own Lord and rebuild the world themselves. Babel is filled with the pride of self and the worship of humanity. Babel seeks to build the city without God. No, we can do this just fine on our own. They are autonomous. Now, to get the full impact of this city imagery, French theologian Jacques Ellul suggests that we need to dig a little bit deeper, and even go back further to Genesis 4, to the story of Cain, where after God confronts Cain for murdering his brother Abel and levies his discipline, God offers grace by placing a mark on Cain to protect him. But what does Cain do? He chooses to reject God's grace. He chooses not to trust God for his protection and security. And in Genesis 4 we read, it says, "Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord, and he built a city." So the city is is metaphorically this place of running away from God and then finding a place of dependence and security in humanity and human power and human will and human ingenuity. So the great city of man, Babylon, is therefore this place of rejecting the presence of God and exalting humanity. So we see from this image in Revelation that what the kind of city that man builds in rebellion from God is like. Next, we see that on top of all this stuff that we've already seen, it says, she's amazing. This nasty woman, this city, she's amazing. Seeing the very powerful woman and the enormity of the great city, seeing all the power and the wealth, the luxuries, the sensual pleasures, and feeling the gravity of it all pulling us in, it just leads us to this sense of amazement. Babylon, the great city, is thought by all of her inhabitants and the various kings and merchants who become wealthy by her as invincible. Look at the great city. Who is like the great city? The shipmasters ask, which is a little bit ironic, as we'll see later. And yet at the same time, the angel brings John out to the wilderness, outside the city, so that he can see the city as it is. And for him it is also amazing, because he gets to see behind the veil, gets to see the inner workings of the great city. And he gets to see how thoroughly corrupt and evil the harlot of Babylon, the great city, is. We also see the dark powers behind it all that empower Babylon to operate. The beast, the dragon, treacherous kings, and so forth. So the picture we see from Scripture is this. We see that she's rich, she's powerful, immoral, she's drunk and intoxicated on her idolatry. She's a city, she's amazing. And yet the characteristics of Babylon, the Babylonness that we see from the images, is that she worships wealth. She is a person of injustice, looking out for herself at the expense of others. She's sexually immoral. She's idolatrous. She's vehemently idolatrous. She's violent, not afraid to use force. She outright rejects and rebels against God. And something that was a little bit hidden in the text too is that there's this element of deception, and then there's an element of counterfeit. The beast is a counterfeit of Jesus. The harlot is a counterfeit of the bride of Christ, and so forth. And and the world is being deceived to try and follow them instead of being who God has made them to be. This is the nature of Babylon. This is the picture of the kingdoms of this world, to use the term that we used last week. This is Babylon the harlot, the great city that we all live in, that they lived in then and that we all still live in right now. This is the great human empire that we've built. When you peek behind the veil, this is what you find. This is what you find from what humanity has done. And this is the fruit, what we see up here. This is the fruit of giving our allegiance to her and to the dark powers underneath her. That's the fruit. Within our passage, we're also given a picture to see why it is so hard to be a faithful disciple of Jesus, why it can be hard to be a disciple in the city. Being in the city and witnessing all of the stuff, all the material goods that are in there, the wealth, the luxury, all the gratifying pleasures that are in our city gates, all the wonders and the opportunities and the points for validation and all the power that's there. It can be very easy to fall into that gravitational pull and get sucked in just to the wonder of it all. It's kind of like When you travel to a big city like Toronto or Montreal or New York, Las Vegas, London, Paris, Tokyo, whatever, one of our great, fantastic cities of the world, like who doesn't like to go around when you're in a city like that and just to explore the big city and to look around and just to see all the great attractions and wonders that are there? I mean, when I travel around to different cities, I like to go around and just see what they've done. You know, I like to see the different schools and universities that they have there with all the, places, centers of knowledge and human learning, and hospitals and research centers, the latest thing in healing, and cathedrals and temples and some of the grand architecture that they've built, and concert halls and sporting arenas with all the incredible entertainment that's available, and great towers and monuments that have been built to human achievement. And then, of course, there's huge shopping centers and sprawling markets where you can get all sorts of great stuff that sometimes you can't get anywhere else. And then there's the fine restaurants where you can get the best of satisfying meals, and the art galleries to wow your eyes, and on it goes. Just great displays of great power and wealth. And being in the big city, it's easy to be overcome with awe over all that man has built. Wow, look at this. This is cool. Now, don't get me wrong. All that stuff is not bad in and of itself. There's nothing wrong with universities and hospitals and cathedrals and concert halls and all that. Nothing wrong with that stuff in and of itself. The danger is that we can become a little too amazed ourselves. We can become a little too amazed by the city and all that it promises us to offer. Very naturally, this stuff just tugs on the desires of our flesh. And our desire for these temporal things can become such that we're willing to serve those things. We're willing to sacrifice for those things. And we're willing to take on Babylon's way of living, her idolatry, to get those things. It's easy to be seduced into joining with Babylon to get your fair share and to partake in her version of the good life. The false gods of economic contentment and stability and security, they cast a magic spell on every nation, just like they do on Babylon here. The apparent invincibility of secular power and human ingenuity compose a deceptive threat to the faith of the believer. They can tempt us to believe that we could possibly live without God. Look at how well we've done here in the city. Do we really need him? I mean, I've got all that I need here in the city. The city gives me everything I need. Why do we even do this God stuff anymore? Why do we gather as the church and be the church? Yeah, can we maybe live without this? It's deceptive to the faith of the believer. But the crux of the matter is this. Babylon demands submission to her secular agenda and her interests rather than God's reign. She's looking to be worshipped. She's looking to be served. There's no way around that. Believers then and now face enormous pressures to participate in her culture and her values. Why? In order to enjoy her benefits. Come join me and you can have all of this. We're constantly under the pressure and the influence and the allure of Babylonness, so to speak. Compromise of our faith can often be viewed as expedient or even necessary. Well, just be a subtle thing, just a little bit won't hurt here because then I have access to all of this. A little bit over there won't hurt. Maybe I can just do one of those things or whatnot. Even if all we do is just lift up our feet and move with the flow of culture, it will take us places. Sometimes the problem isn't even that we're actively pursuing Babylon. It's that we've been content to let ourselves go adrift and just go with the currents, flow in the currents of the city that we're in. We're not mindful to keep our feet anchored and remember the kingdom into which we've been saved and the call of our Lord. Yet, we go with the flow of culture, and if we go with the flow of culture, we're inevitably one day going to have a wake-up. Wait a minute. How did I get here? What's going on? This is not where I wanted to be. But that's where the current took you. Following, allowing with Babylon, following along with Babylon, even passively, it causes us to become like her. We end up like her and we reap her fruits. So the real issue here that we see is an issue of discipleship at every point. Who are you going to follow? Because we're always giving our allegiance to someone or something. At every point, who are we going to follow? Well, in response to Babylon's evil, in light of God's call to holiness, Jesus tells us this: "Come out of her, my people, so that you do not take part in her sins, and so that you do not share in her plagues." The laments within our scripture passage show us the values of this world that God's faithful people are to renounce. And we're being given revelation into the things of this world that lead people away from God's salvation and lead them towards God's judgment. In His mercy, He's calling us out of the city to save us from destruction. It's a call of mercy. It's a call of freedom from the slavery to the things of this world. So what does this mean to come out? Come out and go where? Where are we supposed to go? How do we come out of Babylon when Babylon is everywhere around us? I could drive from Edmonton to Calgary and, still in Babylon. Fly to Houston, Texas, still in Babylon. Jump a plane to Buenos Aires, Babylon still. Where do you go? How do you come out of Babylon? We find a little clue in the words of Jesus in John 17. Jesus says, "My prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one, the deceiver, the tempter, because they're not of the world, even as I am not of it." Coming out of the great city doesn't mean a change of location, but a change of citizenship. We're not citizens of Babylon, we're citizens of the New Jerusalem. If you've ever traveled to another nation, I'm sure you've noticed that other nations, they have different leaders and things run differently. There's different values. There's different practices that you experience there. Our change of citizenship from the city of man to the city of God, it's a change of leadership, it's a change of values, it's a change of practices. It's a change of the way that we live. We're called to live in the city, but not be of the city. Just like Jesus spoke about his kingdom that we looked at last week. His kingdom is not from this world, but his kingdom is for this world. He is in the city, but he's not of the city. We're called to live in the city, but not be of the city. And that's not always an easy task, to come out of Babylon, to be in the city, but not of the city, and get drawn and sucked into her way of living. And this is exactly why we need the Christian community that we have here. We need each other's help in this, to remember whose we are, and to remember how we live. We're being called in the midst of this culture and its pressures and its seductions to live in a different way. We have a different master, and his ways are not from this world. Well, much of our scripture passage contains God's indictment against Babylon and all that she embodies. her idolatry, her greed, the economics of her exploitation, and politics of deception and violence, and the immorality, and all the ways that they destroy God's world and his people. And God has taken careful notice. And as the angel allows John to see behind the veil, he reveals a few things that we can now see too. Babylon is falling, and judgment is coming. Now in our story, we see the woman, the great city, sitting on the beast, and she's drawing her authority and strength from the beast, which again is that image of political power and structures. And yet, what does the beast do? He remains true to his beastly nature, and so do the kings of the earth who are united with the beast. The beast and his followers eventually turn on the woman and destroy her. Evil turns on itself. That's its nature. Evil turns in on itself. It implodes. It self-destructs. And the city that draws its authority and strength from anything other than the living God ends up being eaten up by that very thing that gave it authority and strength. Babylon gets eaten up by the very power that made it Babylon. And we see this repeatedly in history. How many, if you're looking through history, how many kingdoms and empires rise and fall and rise and fall and rise and fall. And how do they rise and fall? By mostly falling on their own swords. Their own wickedness catches up with them. I love this quote here by theologian Earl Palmer. The greed that gave them power in time shall destroy their power. The weapons by which they conquer in time will conquer them. For they sowed what they sowed, they will reap. Which is actually a quote from Galatians 6, verse 7. God's revealing a warning through the angel that Babylon is falling. The great city is falling. Babylon, in whatever the current form is, whether it's the Greek Empire or the Roman Empire of Jesus' day, it can be the Spanish Empire, the British Empire, the North American Empire, Babylon will always fall. Babylon is terminally self-destructive. And here's the thing that Jesus is trying to tell us, is that if we remain in Babylon, you're going to go down with it. The ship is only going in one direction. Babylon is falling. Remain in Babylon and you will go down with it. Remember, judgment is coming. God has taken notice. For all her pride and wickedness, God judges the great city in this prophetic vision. And as God's judgment comes, it reveals the absolute frailty of our secular power and exposes the charade of our human invincibility. Chapter 18, we notice 3 times the phrase, in 1 hour. The judgment of Babylon has brought on her own head. It comes very quickly and very unexpectedly. And what do we see? The nations, the kings, the merchants, they're mourning. Why? The wealth has been laid waste. The loss of the markets to buy their goods. And we notice too that they don't mourn for the great city and its people, but they mourn for themselves, and they mourn for the lost opportunity to exploit the city for power and for wealth. So even in this, even in her destruction and judgment, we still see the great sickness of Babylon in there. Yet, among all this mourning, we hear the following words in verse 20. Rejoice over her, O heaven, you saints and apostles and prophets, for God has given you judgment against her. So even in this act of judgment within our world, there's reason for worship. God's judgment of the great city brings vindication for all believers, all followers of Jesus who have suffered under evil for the sake of following the Lamb wherever he goes. His judgment is the answer to the cry of the martyred saints under the heavenly altar that we read about in Revelation 6. How long, O Lord? How long will you allow this to go on? His judgment is an act of faithfulness to his people. He brings it to an end. He will bring evil to an end. The persecutors have finally reaped what they've sown, and so too have the people of God. They've sown their lives as seeds to righteousness, and they have reaped the justice of God in their favor. We're being divinely encouraged here within our passage. Don't be afraid. As we live in the great city, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of Babylon or of any of those under her power. They can reject and resist the rule of Jesus, but what did we read? They cannot overcome him. As hard as they try, they cannot overcome him. We're being directed to hang tough, or actually to hang gentle. The Lamb needs no help to overcome. They cannot resist him. And the good news is that God has triumphed over Babylon, and he's liberated the Lamb's faithful from Babylon's evil so that we can serve the Lord forever. So what we see here is a second imperative, not only to come out, but to rejoice. God will be faithful, and he will act in power on behalf of his people. He will vindicate us. Right in the middle of the great city is the Lamb, who's the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings, who is able to lead us into the ways of the greater city that is to come. And this is why Jesus gives us this revelation. The imagery gives us that he gives us, it sharpens us to the issues and the choices. Jesus gives us revelation to free his church from its Babylonian captivity and to free us for this new city, the New Jerusalem, that will never, ever fail.